All right. So I'll just give a brief outline, and then we can just go ahead and get started. So the format's a little weird. I have some slides made up to make some of the information easier to follow, so I'll be switching back and forth. And um, I hope this isn't going to be too awkward. I mean, it is weird sort of giving a presentation to a camera, but I'm glad you're all there. I'm glad you're listening. So we'll get through this together. And just to give a brief outline, I'm going to start by going over the last year, some of the challenges we faced, also some of the, I call them victories that we've had. Then I'm going to announce the new ministry. I know that's something I've been teasing for a while. We finally got everything set, finally got the approval back from the state with the incorporation and everything. So I'll be presenting that. And then I'm going to take some time to share from some of our young adults. They wrote up some things for me to share. I also have some other stories about their experience with the ministry. Then I'm going to transition, talk about future goals, and then tie it off by going over a few financial details and some of the more church business stuff. And then if anyone wants to stick around after that, we can have some time for, feedback. And if you have any questions, anything you want me to go over in more detail, we can do that. So I'm trying to be respectful of everyone's time because I know it's just, watching a screen. So as if we don't do enough of that already. But I'll go ahead and get started here. I wanted to start with, all right, let me get this pulled up here. Make sure I'm doing this right. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh boy. Sorry, give me a second while I fiddle with this. Okay, there we go. So I'll go ahead and get this up there for you. There we go. Are you all seeing that? Okay, perfect. So I wanted to get started by mentioning this verse, Romans 8:28. I'm sure it's familiar to some of you. This is the New King James Version. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And this was a verse that came up during our church staff meeting this last week. And I wrote it down because I immediately recognized, this is really the theme for the year 2020 for us. Because, it's not just, all things that are good, work out. It's not just for those who love God, everything happens. That's all good and everything's rosy and everything's, sunshine and rainbows. But all things, both good and bad, work together for good. And it left an impression on me. But I also really liked how Pastor Chelsea kind of vocalized this. I don't think she was intending to quote Romans 8:28, but during the staff meeting, I hope she doesn't mind if I share this. She actually said this at one point, and I had to write it down. She says, "God will never let me live in a situation that won't matter in the end." And I absolutely loved how she articulated that because I feel that it's so true that no matter what challenges we face, no matter even like the victories that we have, it will all matter in the end. And so, in the spirit of that, I did want to go over some things that happened this last year in 2020 because we did face some challenges, but I want to take time to praise God for everything that's happened. And starting with, praising God for the challenges. So these were some of the challenges that we faced as a ministry this last year. For those who followed the monthly newsletter that went out every month, I'm going to try to not repeat information because some of this you will be aware of, though. But I have to give a little bit of background on the first one. So the ministry is operating with support, financial support from the Eastern Michigan district. And last year in March, that support was supposed to increase because right now they're just covering a portion of our budget. And that was supposed to increase. But when COVID happened, the whole district budget froze. And so we didn't get the increase we were expecting. And that was pretty tough for us because we were still trying to get our foot in the door, trying to get things moving. And pretty quickly we realized, okay, we're going to have to try and gain a little bit of financial momentum and really cut back on what we're looking at for this next year. Because at that point, the ministry was sort of, well, I guess I'll put it this way. We have a target amount that we try to get to every month. our baseline financial obligation. The district covers a significant portion of that, and the rest is made up from the ministry itself. And so when the district didn't increase the support, the ministry had to make up the difference. And so that was a pretty tough time for us, tough truth to reckon with. And then it was supposed to increase again this year, but again because of COVID, it froze again. But not just that, but there was also another ministry on the district that that was planning on setting aside dollars to help support us and help pay for resources and stuff like that. And that didn't happen either because the district budget froze. So that knocked the wind out of us fairly quickly on the front end. But it was still fairly early on, and as tough as it was, we understood. And I'm not gonna beat up the district, because I will say, and this is something I really do commend our district leadership for, we are the only young adult ministry that I'm aware of on the USA Canada region where the district actually puts its money where its mouth is when it comes to young adult ministry. I mean, I've heard stories of districts that pull support, but we are really the first district to actually say, no, we really value a ministry to our young people, and so we're going to actually back this up. So I do want to call out the district for that and thank them very much. So even though some of the decisions they've had to make have been kind of frustrating to work around, I understand how that works, and I'm not broken up about it. The other thing that happened that was a challenge for us was district assembly was canceled. And that was tough because as a new ministry, we were going to be presenting last year, and that would have given us a lot of attention. It would have helped us connect with many churches because they would have seen, oh, this is a new ministry that's going on. And then we would have been able to follow up with that by visiting. But because we weren't able to do that, we're still facing kind of an uphill climb, an uphill battle, trying to gain recognition on the district and trying to let churches know, like, no, we are a ministry on your district. We're in this together. We're not some outside group coming in. But so that's something that we're still wrestling with. The third thing that we met a challenge was churches not gathering in person, and churches not gathering in person meant that churches did not want to have guests come and speak because just everything was very restricted. Excuse me. So that was tough because, being our first year, we wanted to establish a solid base of connections as well as a solid base of financials. And one of the main ways we were planning on doing that was being able to visit churches, being able to build those connections, and also raise support. So it was pretty challenging when we had set out at the beginning to basically fill as much of the calendar year as we could with visiting churches. And in the end, once COVID came around, we ended up visiting only 3. We visited Plymouth, Gagetown. We had to send a video because of weather reasons. And we also visited Devonair. So those were the 3 that we ended up visiting, and I'm very grateful for those, absolutely. But it was a tough first year. And then the last one is a bit obscure. It made it very difficult for us to figure out how we were going to continue ministering to young people because of something that's called screen fatigue. And some of you know what this is, in case anyone doesn't. Screen fatigue is basically when you spend so much time in front of a screen, you just get tired of it. You don't really want to just add something else on top of that. And that was something we started feeling that I'll stop sharing this for a second. That we started feeling our young people were experiencing because they were at school, they had to move virtual, so they were in class all day on their computer, and asking them to attend one more thing on the screen was something that was very difficult for us to justify. So we did have a small group that we kept doing. Even up until this time, we do that once a week. We've had some ideas of, well, maybe we'll do a game night one day a week. Well, where would we do that? Well, it would have to be online. So maybe we don't want to do that because, again, that's just one more thing to ask them to come back to the screen for. And we also saw, I don't know if this played into it, but towards the beginning to middle of 2020, we did see a couple losses on our side. There were a couple students that we were starting to build connection with. One student who was there at the beginning, who just, kind of dropped out. I'm not sure why. I've tried reaching out to them, but they just, moved on for one reason or another. So, excuse me. So those were a couple of challenges, those were a few challenges that we faced in 2020. But, by the grace of God, we're still here. So this isn't like a complaint of, oh, everything was awful. There was some good things that happened. I'll get to those in a minute. But I just wanted to be realistic that 2020 did see its fair share of challenges for us. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and move on to the next piece, which is that we did have some new opportunities. So these are sort of the victories that we had in 2020. We definitely had opportunities to try new things. Because everything had shifted, because everything was moved to being not in person, we really had to reinvent how we approach ministry. I know this is not new for anyone. Anyone who's worked in church or ministry the last year has experienced this. So, but for us, it was more so because we really hadn't had anything solid established yet in terms of what to expect in what we did. So it gave us a lot of room to experiment. And throughout the year, as you read the newsletters, you see some of those experiments coming into play. One of them was, excuse me, kind of setting up young adult ministry zones and then setting up zone leaders in different parts of the district. That kind of fell on its face pretty quick. But that's okay. I mean, part of experimenting is being able to accept that not everything you try is going to succeed. Some things fail, and that's all right. You learn from them. We did have some new connections from those, though. I was able to connect with some other young adult leaders across the district. So those were definitely good. Another victory that we had that was a very good thing was the podcast, actually. We were trying to figure out what to do with our time. And a good friend of mine from college, Jordan Britt, him and I talked about starting a podcast together where we talk about Christian faith and living from the perspective of two millennials, because we're both millennial, and reaching to a younger audience like Gen Z and even millennials as well. And we've seen a lot of success with that podcast. Actually, we get a lot of feedback, and our audience is a lot more diverse than I expected at the beginning. We do have a lot of young people doing it. We have some teenagers that listen. We also have people I know who are senior citizens who listen. And so we love it. We love the feedback. We love that people are enjoying it. And that was something that we experimented with and ended up succeeding. The new connections I already mentioned, there were some young adult leaders that I had met. There was a young adult group in Plymouth. There's also a young adult group in the Swartz Creek area from Nazarene churches. So we've been able to connect there. We haven't been able to do much, but that's just the nature of 2020. There's not a whole lot we can do. We did have some ministry projects that we did. The first of which we sort of called the Letters to the Elders because we didn't really know what else to call it. When I say we, this idea was really motivated by one of our young adult members, our small group participants. They really felt the need in our community of senior citizens who are facing a lot of isolation right now. And so we want to do something about that. And so we came up with this idea of, well, why don't we start writing letters? So we started that. We have that. It's ongoing. It was obviously a lot more active during the holidays, but this is something that we'll keep going. We'll keep doing this. The other project we did was memory boxes. And essentially, there was someone from a local hospital, the labor and delivery unit. I can't say what hospital it is. And they are, they're young adults. They had connections with our group. And they mentioned that at their hospital, one of the things they see is a lot of lost patients, women who lose their baby either during pregnancy, childbirth, or early infancy. And so the hospital provides memory boxes, these essentially care packages with various items in them to provide comfort. And they were running low on supplies, but they're not allowed to advertise or ask for donations. So this person says, why don't we raise some money to help purchase supplies for this? And I want to thank those who were involved in this, who gave to this, because each memory box was going to be around $50. And thanks to the generosity of the people who gave, and also the cleverness of my wife, who purchased a lot of the supplies and being able to find sales in a way that only she can do, we were able to supply over 12 boxes, which is pretty significant. So we just want to say thank you for that. So that was one of our other ministry projects. The last thing, which was really major for us, was 2020 allowed us to step back and really clarify our vision. Because when we started, we were very much focused on college students, which is, that's just what our focus was. So, being on campus. But since everything went virtual, we said, you know what, why don't we pull the scope back a little bit and respond to a larger need that we were beginning to see, which is not just college students, but young adults in general, people from ages 18 to 30 who, regardless of whatever walk of life they're in, whether they're, recent high school grads or if they're married with children, that age group is what is really facing a major drop off in terms of church activity and church attendance. Because, this is a larger need that we're seeing. So why don't we, what's keeping us from addressing that instead of just college students? So essentially, why are we focusing on just college students when there's a larger body of people that need to, have a space that's theirs? And so we were, able to do that. We were able to pull back a little bit and ask those questions and see, what does that look like? And we worked a lot with the district youth. So the NYI president and vice president helped us a lot with that and having those conversations. And so, so we did start moving in a new direction. This is where I'm going to transition into our new ministry. Obviously, one of the big hurdles that we faced was our name. Because campus ministry really communicates college students. And because we weren't focused on just college students anymore, we were focusing more on young adults in general. We said, we really need to change that name. Because even now, even working with people who know about our name change and the new ministry, it's still, again, an uphill battle to communicate, no, we're here for all young adults, not just college students. So the name had to change. And along with that, the logo needs to change. We need a new website, all that stuff. So I reached out to one of our young adults who had recently graduated with a degree in design. And she works with social media. She designs websites. And not only that, she was also getting married at the time. So I can't believe she did the amount of work that she did around that. It's just insane. But I approached her at first and said, hey, could you design a logo for us? And in the process of that conversation, she really challenged me to, go back to the drawing board. And because she would ask me things like, well, what is your ministry really about? Like at the heart of it, what's the core of your ministry? And she had to ask some tough questions. And a lot of that was, I'm very thankful for, because we were in that transition period of sort of rediscovering what this ministry was going to be. So, I mean, she was very instrumental in that process. And for those who know, her name is Natasha O'Quinn, and she did a phenomenal job. She worked with me over, I think, around 6 months before we finally got everything nailed down and set. So a tremendous amount of work. And so with that being said, I want to go ahead and kind of launch our new ministry, and a little bit of background to it, even though I've already given a lot, is kind of the new focus, although I guess it's always been the focus, but the more clarified way of articulating it is, we want to be able to be a place for young adults of all walks of life to be able to come together, to be able to explore the faith and be able to ask questions. It's not just be fed, canned answers like, oh, come to the small group, we'll tell you what to believe. We want to create a space where they can, really explore, what does it mean to be a follower of Christ? And not just that, but what does it mean for me to have a place in the kingdom? What can I bring to the table? What can I contribute? And to that end, I'm excited to announce, and let me get this pulled up here, our new ministry, which is called Common Ground Ministry. And so you'll see this. This is our website here. It is, I believe it's live now. Yeah, it's published now. If you want to go there, it is commongroundmi.org. And you can check that out for yourself. This is just sort of a preview of it. You can find, our mission, values, vision. Natasha set up this whole website pretty much. So, I mean, she's done a lot of work for us. I do want to say, though, on the support page, you'll see a donate button. That is not active right now, and there's a reason for that. I'll get to it later, but essentially, well, I guess I'll explain it now. We don't have a bank account set up just yet. We're still working out the finer details of getting everything set for the ministry. But once we do, you'll be able to donate directly. Right now, it goes through the Eastern Michigan District. But once we get everything set, you'll be able to donate directly to us, and it'll just be a much easier process and much easier for us to keep track of what's happening with finances, because sometimes it's difficult when you have to communicate with multiple people. So that's the new ministry, and that is our new name, Common Ground Ministry. So that's what I'll be referring to it as from now on. Obviously, this title is still EMD, but regardless. So that is the new ministry that we have. That's the new direction we're going. So now I want to shift. I want to share some from our young adults themselves. Excuse me. So earlier this week, I asked our small group if they'd be willing to share a few words about their experience being a part of the ministry. And so a couple of them sent me messages. They're pretty big. I'll have them on here. You can read these later at your leisure if you want to look this up on YouTube later. I'm not going to read this verbatim. I'll maybe skim some of it. But this just kind of gives you a feel of their perspective of what's going on with how we're doing ministry together. So this is what one of them said. I think one of the primary benefits of this group for me is a flexible combination of, and they're talking about our small group time, of reading the word and discussing real and sometimes tricky topics surrounding Christianity. And we seem to often use scriptures as a jumping off point to talk about more pressing questions or interests that are on our mind. And being in a smaller group allows us to have talks like this in a conversational way, which is really nice. And I want to pause here before I continue reading this and just explain a little bit. So for our small group time, what we normally do is we have a reading for the week of scripture. And then at the beginning of the small group, I'll give a summary of what we read, maybe ask a few questions or bring up some interesting points. And then from there, I just leave it open. So they can ask whatever questions they want. They can, maybe bring up something that's been on their mind. Sometimes it's about the scripture. Sometimes we go off on totally wacky tangents, but that's, it works for us. So, all right, anyways, I'll move on. So many times people, especially myself, will rest on some of the deeper aspects of Christianity. It allows me, the way we conduct our small group, it allows me to ask what I really want to ask when I want to ask it. But I'm really glad that you're not always pressured to give the answer. And I guess he's talking about me there. Excuse me. Sometimes we ask hard questions, but sometimes those are the important ones. That might mean that the answer we get from you, and this is true, I feel like I answer this a lot. That's a really good question. I'm not sure what the answer is, but here's what I think given, the background and, other aspects. And personally, I really value that and believe that others do too. High level concepts aside, the two individual moments that come to mind for me right now are when we discussed Christian apologetics, which I'd never learned about before, but was incredibly interesting to hear about, and picking apart passages and realizing things like, wow, maybe there weren't three Marys in the Gospels. So as an aside, we did have a discussion one night. I don't know how we got on this topic of if Mary Magdalene was the woman who washed Jesus's feet with her hair, and it ended up being a very interesting exploration into who that woman was. We compared the different gospel stories. We looked at some commentaries and other resources online. It was a really interesting conversation. Had nothing to do with the scripture that we read that day, but that's how things go. And then I'll just read what he said at the bottom here. All in all, we like this group a lot. It's been nice to have during this COVID time to be able to see some more faces and check in with people. We might be a bit of a melting pot of views, but that brings to light cool discussions and opinions. And what more could we ask for? So that was what one of the young people shared. And this is another one. Says, I've really enjoyed the Bible study this year. Personally, I've never actually read more than the Gospels before, so working chronologically has been very beneficial for me for understanding the stories because we've been working from Genesis onwards. I also love the structure, but the freedom at the same time so we can talk about the passage or trail off and talk about other ideas that come to mind. It helps keep things interesting and refreshing rather than doing the same thing every week with the same process. It starts to feel like school whenever that happens. I also appreciate the research that goes into the passages and just in general. And when I ask questions that aren't always easy or possible to answer, I feel like I get a well researched response instead of one that's uh, a canned response and it's my questions aren't ignored. And also found this interesting when they said this. I'm not a huge fan of Zoom, and I honestly am so bored at the other Bible study I'm a part of that I used to enjoy and get into. But we have somehow figured out how to make it so that I look forward to Bible study over Zoom. It feels like a conversation more than a class, and I like that. Um, so those were just a couple stories that were shared with me, and I really appreciate them. I mean, I really do. Because we have a great time during small group, and I've seen them grow a lot throughout this year, which is kind of tricky sometimes because you're just talking over a screen. um but it really does mean a lot when they mention things like that. And there's something else I wanted to share too. This person didn't share anything with me this week, but they have shared this with our group. So we have someone who attends our small group who's from a Christian background, but it's a Christian background that tends to be looked down upon a lot by other traditions. And I remember when they first came, they were very hesitant to say too much. Then over time, they opened up and said, I was actually hesitant to join this group because I'd been a part of other small groups that were not from my own church. And uh, almost every time I end up being mocked or made fun of or treated as an outsider. And they said, but this is the first time I actually feel welcomed and a part of the group, just as anyone else. And it's true. Like, this person is a phenomenal contribution to our small group. I think it's sad that they've been treated the way they have with other groups. But we love having this person there. And actually, this is the person who proposed the letters idea that we did as a mission project and that we're still doing. So they've been an incredible asset to us. I love that they're there. I love that they feel just as welcomed and just as a part of what we're doing as anybody else. And not just those people. So those are people who are currently a part of our small group. I do want to share one story I heard recently, and I want to be careful about what I say because I don't want to give anything away. But there was a young person. They're not a young adult yet. They haven't graduated high school, but they said, I think this was a while back, but they had said that they can't wait to graduate high school so they could be a part of what we're doing. And that to me, I mean, I know it kind of speaks for itself, but that to me really spoke volumes about what we're really doing here, because sometimes I'll admit it's frustrating some weeks to be like, what are we really doing? 'Cause sometimes it just feels like, we just have a Zoom meeting once a week, but it seems like God's really up to something. I mean, there is a culture that is being cultivated here where people who aren't even a part of it are wanting to be a part of it. I don't know how that happens, but it does, apparently. And that just gets me so excited for the future because I know that, it's not just about the young people that we have who are a part of our ministry right now. It's also about the young people who are going to be a part of it in the future. And that to me really signals that something really good is happening here that you really can't articulate with facts and figures and going through, plans and, details of the last year, the next year, whatever. I mean, and it's really special. And it's also very, affirming and encouraging to me to know that we're, cultivating that sort of environment that people want to be a part of it and they're excited about it. Yeah, I could keep, gushing about that, but I won't. So now I want to move on a little bit to, I just want to make sure this is going to be the next thing. I don't want to be jumping ahead. Yeah. So now I want to move on to what the future is going to look like for the ministry. So we looked at sort of the last year of 2020. Now I want to look forward to 2021 and beyond. And this is going to be maybe a little interesting. So right now we have two things planned long term. I've been working with missionaries in Kenya, planning a mission trip to East Africa in 2022. So that's been on the table for a while, still making progress with that. We were going to have a young adult retreat this year, but because everything's so uncertain, I decided to push it back a year, just because I didn't want to advertise something and get it out there and then cancel it. And here I need to explain a little bit. So I am the unofficial coordinator for what's called Campus Mission on the ONU field. So Campus Mission is the USA Canada Church of the Nazarene's young adult ministry. And so that's broken down into the different fields. So I am the coordinator for the ONU fields. That's all the districts in Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And here in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be proposing this idea to the district youth presidents on the ONU field at a national youth leader conference in Indiana. Anyways, so I am planning on having a young adult retreat for essentially all young adults on the ONU field sometime in 2020. So that's on the table. So those are two specific things that we have planned in the future. But you might be wondering, well, what about 2021? And that's a good question, because that's a question we've been asking too, is, well, what about 2021? And this is where I want to explain a little bit about how we do vision casting. So a few weeks ago, I met with Pastor Jeff Crowder, who's the pastor at the Chelsea Church. He's also a member of our board. And I told him I'm a bit frustrated with myself because I've never been good at vision casting, because vision casting to me was always about having a very clear, articulated view of what the future is going to look like. We're going to be doing these things at these times and these places by these means. And I was never good at that. I'm not good at, having that clear of an idea of what the future is going to look like. Instead, what I tend to do is I just get very excited about possibilities. So my focus has always been more about how do we develop the core of who we are, that mission, that focus, that driving spirit of a ministry, and what possibilities could that open up in the future. So that's tended to always be my approach to how I do things. I'm still trying to figure out how exactly it works. And with stuff like this, sometimes I know it might be difficult to explain what the future is going to look like for the ministry, especially when the director of the ministry is saying, yeah, I don't really have a specific plan. And that's a tough thing to sell sometimes, but that also gets me excited because it allows us to be flexible, and it is consistent with our core mission and our core values as a ministry, because it's not about me having a vision and trying to get us to that point and telling our young adults, you know what, this is the goal we need to get to, and so we just need to get there. It's always been a central part of who we are to say to our young adults, what is God doing in your life? What passions do you have? What's your creativity look like? What are your talents? What do you have to invest in this? How do you want to see the kingdom be built in our community? And allowing that to shape how our vision plays out in the specifics that happen later. And I feel like this approach has been validated with the last year, because if we would have gone into 2020, because we didn't go into 2020 with a clear vision of this is exactly what we're going to do. And I think Pastor Jeff and I had a few conversations early on where I mentioned I feel bad because I don't have a clear idea. But thinking back, I'm really glad we didn't, because more than likely we would have died in 2020, because we were a brand new ministry. And if we would have had a specific idea of what we wanted that to look like, and then COVID happened and all of that just fell down, I don't know if we would have been able to adjust. But ever since the beginning, we've been about, no, we want to remain flexible and allow our young adults to help shape what this looks like and help them to have buy-in and a space where they can contribute, where they can invest themselves and shape this as God is shaping them. And because we did that, when COVID happened, it really didn't affect us all that much. Yeah, we had some challenges to face, how do finances look? What does ministry look like? But we really weren't that intimidated by it because we just saw it as, oh, well, this is just a time for us to adapt, which is what we're made to do anyways. Adapt and change over time. We try to remain flexible, and that's part of what we do. And that's partly why we don't have specifics on, what we're going to do in the future. And again, that brings me back to that makes me excited because I know that there's room for our young adults to come up with ideas. Like the mission projects I mentioned earlier, the letters and the memory boxes, those weren't my ideas. Those were ideas that our young adults had. Those grew out of needs that they felt in the community that they wanted to address. I really didn't have much to do with it. All I did was provide a platform for them to share their ideas and then say, all right, let's do it. Let's get organized. Let's approach this. Also, even the Common Ground ministry itself, that was, 80%, probably 90% Natasha, and 10 or 20% me. But that's what I love about it is I love providing a space for young adults to really feel they can invest themselves, that they don't have to just sit by the sidelines and be told what to do and just wait their turn, but they can try out things themselves. They can experiment and they can have that space. And I just love that. And that's been a core motivation of why I wanted to go into young adult ministry in the first place, was from my experience in churches and also the experience of others. Because this is an area where a lot of churches, I think, struggle with. Um, and I can only speak from my experience on this, but some churches, they'll say, we see that young adults, that there's a need in our church, for a young adult ministry or something. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start a small group or a weekly worship service, and young adults can attend and they can be a part of it. But that's a pretty passive participation. And what I've discovered, which I know is true for me, but I've also discovered as a general rule of thumb for working with young adults, especially nowadays in that 18 to 30 year range, is you really need to create a space where they can make decisions and they can take initiative and they can get their own hands dirty in shaping what does it mean to be a follower of Christ. Let's explore this. Let's try new things. Let's not just attend a study and be passive participants. Let's not just attend the church and just sit there and listen. Let's actually be a part of the process. And that seems to really be working for us. I see the excitement in the young adults, and that seems to, yeah, I'm just going to end up repeating myself. Sorry, I get excited by some of this sometimes, so I can keep going. But anyways, so back to the future casting, vision casting. That's why I have written on here, we have an open-ended vision. We try to do that intentionally, to create that space where we can listen to our young adults and allow them to, shape this as it goes on. But okay, I'm already repeating myself. All right. So moving on. That wraps up kind of all that stuff. I want to move on to more the businessy aspects. I want to talk about finances. So for last year, from January of 2020 to February of this year, we raised $17,239, which is absolutely incredible. And I cannot express how grateful I am and how proud I am to have ministry partners who also believe in what we're doing and who see God working. And a lot of our success can be traced back to people who have partnered with us. So thank you very much for that. And that went to cover ministry related expenses. That also went to covering the difference between, this is something I mentioned earlier, Eastern Michigan District and the housing allowance. I want to explain that a little bit more, just to share what exactly those dollars go towards when I mentioned that. So before my wife and I moved down to Ypsilanti to begin young adult ministry, when the conversations with the district were all taking place, I communicated, in order for us to make this move, in order for us to afford actually living there, because anyone who's lived in Ann Arbor, Ypsi knows, it's not the cheapest place to live. It was going to be a stretch for us. I says, we need to have a goal. Like we need to have X amount per month so that we can just be there. And through back and forth with the district and negotiating all of that, we settled on an amount. The district covered a portion of it, and the ministry covers the rest of it. And so that gives us what's called the housing allowance, which is a ministry financial term. I won't get into all the details, but that's just why I wrote down housing allowance here. So that's what the funds go towards. So that being said, we do have our financial goal for 2021 and 22. This goes from March of this year to February of next year, which is the church year for how the district operates. So what we did is we took the baseline amount that we need to raise for every month, which is $1,200 a month, and we just stretched it out for 12 months. One, because we have no idea how 2021 is going to look, so we didn't want to create a bunch of categories that we would never use, and we just wanted to keep it very simple because we know that the year hasn't been easy for a lot of people, so we don't want to make it harder by trying to create a goal that is going to be very difficult to hit. So that gives us a total for the whole next year, this is all 12 months, of $14,400. And that covers all of the monthly obligations for the next 12 months. And we already have, as essentially rollover from the last year, $2,389, which leaves us with $12,011 to raise for the next year. So that is that goal. Now you might be wondering, well, wait a minute. Back in the fall, you were trying to raise $17,000 for, I think it was September to February. So what happened with that? All right, so I want to explain that a little bit. And I do apologize that I did not communicate this over the monthly newsletters. That's on me. I had gotten distracted by the ministry planning and all that. That's not an excuse. It happened. That's still on me. I should have explained this. So back in August, I believe it was August, I met with a member of our board to talk about a budget, because up until that point in 2020, we didn't have a budget with listed items or anything. We kind of went month to month, and we said, no, we need to start, making more long-term budget goals. And what we saw in August was we saw the economy beginning to open up. It seemed restrictions were being loosened and things might be returning to normal. So with that in mind, we set certain budgeting goals in certain categories like traveling expenses and ministry events and ministry projects, stuff like that. And we came up with a monthly budget of, I believe it was just over $2,000. I do have the specific figure somewhere. I don't have it in front of me. I'm sorry. And then we extrapolated that out for the following 6 months, which gave us a total of about $17,000. However, very quickly after that, we realized that that budget is not useful for us, because the way the country, and especially the way the state of Michigan was going, most of these items were not going to be useful or tenable for us. So why set a budget that we're not even going to need? Because the economy started to close back down, COVID started spreading again, and so things were shutting down. And so what we did is we went back and we cut almost everything down to the bare bones minimum of what we needed every month, which is that $1,200 figure. And again, I apologize. I did not put that in the monthly newsletters. It fell through the cracks. But that's why, well, I guess partly that's why I never mentioned it after that. But also I do want to say that did happen. So we did adjust down. But, in light of that, I do thank those who gave through that process. That money was not wasted. It's still, helping us to continue on. And I spaced. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention was, and also we have never, since we started, we have never missed our monthly budget goals. Like we've never had our account dip or anything. So, and we are so grateful for that, because we know a lot of people have been struggling throughout 2020, and it really does mean a lot. And that's, thanks to our partners and for those who, who have invested themselves into this ministry. And on the note of finances, we do have some, oh, I didn't realize I was going to pop up so soon. Good thing I didn't have screen share on. We do have some future goals for finances. And I want to take a minute to explain this a little bit. So I've always felt it's important that as a ministry, we are as good of stewards as we can be when it comes to, well, everything, but especially finances. So that includes, being transparent and communicating, which I admit already, I kind of, missed a part last year, but being able to communicate and also being able to handle finances in such a way that we can be as effective as possible when it comes to our functions as a ministry. So that being said, we do have a long-term financial goal of setting up an endowment in the future. Because again, it goes back to that question of how can we help our ministry partners have the greatest impact? And one of the things I see a lot of young adult ministry struggle with is year-to-year finances. So what you'll see a lot is, excuse me. So what you'll see a lot is every year a ministry will have to raise, let's say $30,000. So throughout the year, they're trying to raise $30,000 to take them through the next year. But then once that year's over and that $30,000 is gone, what do they have to do? They have to raise $30,000 again. And I understand that's a model that a lot of people use, and sometimes that's the only model that they can use. And I understand that. But I've always wondered, well, what if you can take some of that money and invest it and stretch out the value and the effectiveness of those dollars? Because um, I don't want to essentially have our bank account be an in and out account, for I don't know how else to say it. $1 in, $1 out. I want to see how can we maximize the gifts that people give us so that we can make them as useful as possible. And part of that does come from being able to cut back on our budgets to the point that, that's feasible for us to help extend the effectiveness of those dollars. But another thing that I'm looking at personally, and I've been talking with some financial advisors about this, what does this look like, is setting up endowments in the future. So one of the figures that I played with a financial advisor during this week was, you know, what could we do or what kind of gift amount would we need to cover our monthly expenses for X number of years? And so this was a number that we calculated. I shouldn't say we. He's the finance guy. It definitely wasn't me that did this. And he said, you could cover $1,200 a month, that base amount, over the next 35 years with a gift of $120,000. If someone or several people gave $120,000, that could cover your baseline monthly expenses for 35 years. Versus if you were to raise 120,000, put it in the bank, and then each month draw off of it, which would only last a little over 8 years. So people who work in finances understand this a lot better than I do, but this is just an example of one of the options we're looking at for how can we, again, help our ministry partners have the greatest impact possible. And I'll also mention here some of my, I guess, long-term dreams and some of the ideas that get me excited when it comes to finances. Because this would be great certainly for covering our monthly expenses. It obviously stretches out the value of those dollars as much as possible, which is incredible. But it also opens up doors for us to expand and work in different areas and try new ministries. So, for example, one of the things I see a lot of young adult ministries that struggle financially. A lot of them are left on their own to figure things out, and sometimes they hit a rough patch. And one of the things that I think would be awesome is, well, what if we could be a ministry that could come alongside them and help them out a little bit? Even if it's just like, what, for the next 6 months or even the next year, we'll pay for your small group resources, right? Something like that. Another idea that comes to mind, looking back at that mission trip to East Africa that we're planning for 2022, what if we had some money set aside that we could set aside to say, what, I know these trips aren't cheap, they're a little expensive, so we have some scholarships to offer so you can go and have this experience. Or even the young adult retreat. I mean, what if we could offer that for free? What if we could have young adults be able to get away, spend some time with the Lord, fellowship and worship together, and not have to worry about how much it's going to cost them? Because young adults, they don't have a lot of money a lot of the time. So what if we could provide things like that? Or another idea that really got me excited. This is something that happened in the church down in Nashville. a guy by the name of Jeremy Height. Some of you might know that name. He worked with a church that did this. They had raised, I think it was around $3,000. They put it into an account. And what they did is they told their young adults, you know what, we want you to come up with a business proposal for a service project in the area, for a need in the community, whatever it is, write up a proposal, how much it's going to cost, whatever. And then there was a group in the church that met as a board. They reviewed the different proposals, they approved some, and those approved proposals got funds from that account to go towards this service project, whatever it was. Maybe it was, repairing a dilapidated house in a poor community, or helping to, clean out the yards of some houses, or, whatever it is. But it wasn't just the money. They also had sort of assigned a mentor to that individual, that young adult, who worked in an area that was beneficial. So maybe they had a background in, I don't know, construction or small business or whatever. But that idea really got me thinking, what if we could do that too? Like that'd be pretty exciting if we could invest in our community in that way and tap into, again, the creative ideas and initiative and passion of our young adults, and be able to support them, and not just encouraging words, but even having dollars to back that up and saying, if you have a project you want to do, we want to help support that. Anyways, those are just some of the long-term ideas I have that kind of get me excited, that, to sort of open the door for other ideas. And so having an endowment as a future financial goal, I'm not saying this is our goal for 2020. This is just an idea that we have going forward, one of the long-term goals of what this could look like. That could really, it's pretty incredible to think about what that could look like. But so that's sort of the financial stuff. I want to move on. This is going to be the last thing I'm going to touch on tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about the church businessy stuff. So this is just a few points for those who are interested, and maybe you're not, so you can zone out. But the Common Ground Ministry is incorporated as a local church, which is awesome for us because it allows us to remain under the umbrella of the Church of the Nazarene. We are not a separate 501c3, which affords us tremendous benefits. For one, we are not seen as an outsider to other Nazarene churches. We are a part of the same family there, because sometimes it's really difficult to get into Nazarene churches if you're not already there. So we are. The other thing that is a great benefit to us is we have the benefits of being a 501c3 under the umbrella of the district. And what was the other thing? Oh yeah, it allows us to partner with other ministries in the Nazarene church, like the youth, like the missions and Sunday school discipleship ministries, which is pretty incredible. So we don't have to just pick one of those groups and form under them. Because we are a local church, we can coordinate with all of them, which is a great benefit. So that's how we're structured. Also, like I mentioned before, we are working on setting up a bank account. Currently, we're just waiting on some papers from Lansing, which go figure. Our treasurer is Mark Wolf. So for those who know the Calling Church of the Nazarene and Pastor Karen Wolf, that is her husband. And I'm very excited to have him on the team. He's going to do an excellent job. Looking forward to that. And something else too, I did want to mention this. So when the podcast started, it was a part of the ministry itself, sort of another function of it. However, in the process of incorporating the ministry and figuring out where the podcast fit in that, and the long-term goals that Jordan and I have for the podcast, we realized it was best to set that up as a separate business entity. So it's actually a DBA, doing business as, that's the podcast. And also I had a conversation with a church attorney, and he said, given your plans for the podcast, it could actually get you in some trouble with the IRS if you function under your ministry. So we decided to split the two just to keep it simple and avoid those complications. But I do want to clarify, since the podcast has started as a separate ministry, none of the money that we've raised for the ministry has gone towards that. In the past, some of the expenses for the podcast were reimbursed by the youth department on the district, but since the podcast formed as a DBA, we have not done that. We just didn't feel it was right. Plus, we never even had that conversation, so we just didn't feel it was appropriate to continue doing that. So that's just a point of clarity. But that being said, that is going to wrap up my sort of presentation for the year. I know it was maybe a bit of a slog. Maybe I repeated myself a lot. I don't know. But that being said, thank you so much. Here in a minute, I will open it up. If you have any questions or if you just want to have conversation for a while, I'll be hanging around. But if you do have to take off, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all that you've done and the support that you've shown. And I am very excited for what God has in the future of this ministry. I'm very excited for the young adults that we have who are participating with us. It's a really exciting time, and yeah. I love what I do. I really do. I love working with these young adults. I love our small groups. They're awesome. So I'll go ahead and stop there and just wrap it up. So